Hello, and welcome to the Marlborough Regional Chamber of Commerce State Representative Middlesex 4th District Debate. My name is Robert SCHLACTER, and I'm the CEO of the Marlborough Regional Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank our timekeeper, Government Affairs Chair Emily Greenwood, and the President of EKG Networking, Inc., and thank you to the candidates, State Representative Danielle Gregoire and Westborough Selectman Syed Hashmi. I'll be your moderator this evening. This event is brought to you by WMCT-TV, the Marlborough Regional Chamber of Commerce, and its Government Affairs Committee. This event is an important part of the Marlborough Regional Chamber of Commerce and Government Affairs agendas. As an independent organization, we can provide a platform for these debates, helping the residents of Marlborough decide who they want for their representation. Tonight's forum is being recorded live via WMCT-TV and will be available on demand tomorrow. We have come together to present this forum for your information. We hope the questions posed will encourage everyone to make an informed vote on November 3rd. Ground rules of the forum are as follows. Each candidate will open with an opening statement of 1 minute, according to the number they chose earlier, followed by questions from myself, and each candidate will have a 1 minute response time. Depending on the time from the first half, the candidates will then have an opportunity to ask questions of other candidates with a 1 minute response and a 30-second rebuttal. The forum will end with each candidate giving a 2 minute closing, also according to the number chosen earlier. So, as we have selected earlier, we have determined that Mr. Hashmi has won the first question. So, opening statement is yours.
Dear friends and neighbors, good evening. COVID-19 touched us all. Some of you lost loved ones without the chance to say goodbye. Others of you lost your jobs and with it access to health care. Still others of you lost access to childcare. This crisis didn't just cause misery, it exposed the misery that was already there. You don't need me to diagnose something is wrong. You know it yourself. The reason I'm running is simple. Has the status quo worked for you? Has the status quo ensured that you can afford to live in this state, not to mention retire in it? Has the status quo ensured that healthcare is affordable? The only way we're going to heal our state, our home, ourselves, is by investing in us. This crisis has shown that we're all vulnerable. This crisis has shown that we need to stand together to protect each other. You don't need a medical degree to care for people. All you need is a heart that cares. Let us hold on to each other and build a better tomorrow today. Join me in healing Massachusetts together.
Thank you. State Representative.
Thank you, Rob. Good evening. I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce for hosting us here this evening, as well as WMCT. I'm Danielle Gregoire, and for the past 8 years, it has been my honor and privilege to serve as state representative for the people of Marlborough, Northborough, and Westborough. Working collaboratively with individuals, municipal leaders, small businesses, we've led the way on pandemic response, putting the safety of our residents first as a precarious economic situation we shore up. I continue to advocate for the needs of this district, whether it be PPE, additional technology for our schools to accommodate distance learning, or increased funding for food pantries to help local families. We've increased access to testing and telehealth, and Massachusetts-based scientific research continues to provide us with potential therapies and vaccines for COVID-19. We live in challenging times, but due to bipartisan leadership of state government, we have the resources and the means with which to weather this storm. Now is a time for proven leadership and demonstrated results, and I look forward to continuing to deliver for the residents of the 4th Middlesex District.
Thank you very much for both of you to your openings, and let's move into our first question. And again, Mr. Hashmi, we'll start with you.
Okay.
Everyone has had to find a way to adapt during this time. Child care companies are no exception. Challenged by staff that did not come back after the first shutdown, enrollments down, and keeping their children and staff safe. What strategy would you bring as state representative to help industries such as childcare?
You know, I'm glad you brought that up because the fact that we do not have affordable childcare in this state was a tragedy well before the start of this pandemic, and now it has even become more essential. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, hardly a liberal leaning institution has put out a study that said funding childcare is the most essential thing that we have to do. So for me, the first thing we need to do is make sure that there's affordable childcare, and that includes affordable pre-K. This is something that we should have, again, done well before the pandemic, but is now even more critical. We need to fund them, we need to provide protections for them, and also, along with this, needs to be expanded testing, which we are not doing. There can be no recovery without affordable childcare.
Thank you very much. State Representative, everyone has had to find a way to adapt during this time. Child care companies are no exception. Challenged by staff that did not come back after the first shutdown, enrollments down, and keeping their children and staff safe. What strategy would you bring as state representative to help industries such as childcare?
Sure. Well, working hand in glove with the Baker administration, the legislature attacked this crisis head on at the beginning of the pandemic, providing emergency child care for frontline workers. And at the time when reopening began, those emergency child care centers were expanded and had plenty of excess capacity for other folks who had to go back to work and had no choice. I think it's important to note that in addition to the healthcare provisions that we've recently enacted into law and some of the other things that the legislature has done, we have realized not only have we been investing more and more every year into pre-K and child care and trying to expand it and also increase the quality, by the way, of that child care, we have continued during this pandemic to do everything in our power to not only help the families who need the care, but also the providers. And the legislature has a proven track record on that, working with the governor. Is it perfect? By no means, but we've done it, and we've proven that it can be done, and we've done it better than any other state in the nation.
Thank you. On to the second question, Mr. Hashmi. Massachusetts is a leader in the medical field with all the hospitals and universities located here. How do you envision leading in healthcare as we go forward with the ACA, or what it evolves into?
So you're right, we are a leader in healthcare. I was trained in the institutions that, I was trained at an institution here. I've worked at several of the major health systems. But let us not forget that healthcare is increasingly unaffordable for the residents of the state. In fact, a significant proportion of the money that families spend, every dollar that, I think it's almost 40% of every dollar that families earned between 2016 and 2019 went to healthcare. The growth in the growth in cost is unsustainable. It is projected that health insurance costs will go up another 8 to 10% next year. Again, in the middle of a pandemic, this is not sustainable. We need to cut down on these costs. We need to, and along with that, also ensure that drug care is, the cost of medicines is affordable. So I think those are cost control is going to be key.
Thank you. State Representative, Massachusetts being a leader in the medical field with all the hospitals and universities located here, how do you envision leading in healthcare as we go forward with the ACA, or what it evolves into?
So I couldn't agree more, actually, with my opponent when we talk about healthcare cost containment. Listen, Massachusetts has been a leader in healthcare from day one. Our model here in Massachusetts was the model for the Affordable Care Act. And we have 97% coverage here in Massachusetts and has increased coverage across the country. So what have we done since then? In 2012, we enacted a significant cost containment bill. In 2018, the House and the Senate passed significant cost containment bills to not only lower the cost of drugs, but also to increase the amount of research that's going into providing more affordable drugs for our residents and our citizens here. So we continue to lead in reducing the cost, and one of the major things that we did at the beginning of this pandemic and again in July is increase access to telehealth. Is it a silver bullet? Absolutely not. Has it ensured that people with underlying conditions are not putting themselves in harm's way by entering a doctor's office or a hospital to receive treatment for their blood pressure or their diabetes? Absolutely. And we've committed to that over and over again. So we have committed to decreasing costs for healthcare while remaining at the highest standard possible here in Massachusetts.
Thank you. On to the next question. What is your opinion on questions 1 and 2 on the ballot this year? Right to repair for question 1, and ranked choice voting is question number 2.
So with regards to question 1, which is the right to repair, I'm in support of that bill. And then with regards to question 2, which is
ranked choice voting.
ranked choice, I'm also in support of that bill.
Very good. State Representative, what is your opinion on questions 1 and 2 on the ballot this year? Question 1 being right to repair and question 2 being ranked choice voting.
Sure. So if I may, I'd first like to take the opportunity to tout the action that, again, the legislature took during the pandemic. One of the earliest things we did in the beginning parts of the summer was enact an early voting provision to create safe ways for folks to be able to vote without having to leave their homes and potentially expose themselves, so they didn't have to choose their health over their vote. And so the early voting period has started, as well as the vote by mail. So you can either vote by mail if you've registered for a ballot, or you can vote by in person early at any of your towns. And that information is available on the town's website, as well as my personal social media. To the point of the questions, the right to repair issue has been in front of the legislature for quite some time now. I don't publicly take a stance on ballot questions, mostly because I believe it's going to be the job of the legislature to then enact whatever the will of the voters is. So I haven't taken a stance, but the right to repair question is serious, and I believe people should do their research on it. And since the ranked choice voting question impacts the way people will vote, I believe the voters of Massachusetts should have a say, and I don't believe I should try to influence that say.
Thank you. On to the next question. We have educational challenges with COVID-19, in-person learning, remote learning, and the hybrid model. How will you help to support all children's learning and address educators' concerns?
So one of the things that's important to remember is that education funding was an issue well before the pandemic. And while the Student Opportunity Act was passed, it did not provide a funding source. Now, granted, they have the Baker administration and the legislature have promised to level fund. That is still not going to be enough with all the new COVID mandates. I'll give you a small example. As this pandemic goes on, we are going to need to provide additional support to our schools. And so one of the things that I firmly believe in is that we need to fund our schools at $100 per student, and we need to make sure that the COVID protections that the schools, or the mandates required by the state need to be fully funded.
Thank you. State Representative, we have educational challenges with COVID-19, in-person learning, remote learning, and the hybrid model. How will you help to support all children's learning and address educators' concerns?
So there's a lot to unpack there. And first of all, I want to say to the families and to the teachers that I am here to support you in any way that I can. We have done supplemental budget provisions for additional technology for school systems so that they can provide Chromebooks and hotspots to the students who can't afford them. And we will continue to do that through supplemental budget, mostly through the CARES Act federal funding. We, in the legislature, year on year, over the last 10 years or 12 years, have increased Chapter 70, which is education funding, annually. The Westborough delegation, Representatives Kane and Dykema, and I worked in a bipartisan way to bring the town of Westborough up to its foundation budget, where it wasn't before, which was a travesty for the students and the teachers of Westborough. So the work goes on, but we are on the front lines, and we have continued to respond to whatever the towns need, whether it's money for food or ways to get the food to those children. And I have to be completely honest and say that my heart goes out to the people on school committees right now who are making these decisions, because they are doing God's work, and they're making the tough decisions literally every day as we here in Marlborough switch back and forth and try to make a decision for what's best for the public health and education of our kids.
Thank you. Next question. Cell signal strength in certain areas of Marlborough is weak. Route 20 East is an example. What would you do to fix this?
You know, I don't have enough expertise on this issue, so I would reach out to people that would know. And so I'm sorry, that's not my area of expertise. So I'll just have, that's the best I can say.
Okay, thank you. State Rep,
Sure.
The cell signal strength in Marlborough is weak. Route 20 East is an example. What would you do to fix this?
So believe it or not, despite my personal frustrations with that situation, one day I had to completely divert my route from where I was going because the mayor was calling, and I couldn't take his call unless I moved off of the Route 20 corridor, which, by the way, it's quite extensive. It goes all the way through Marlborough, Route 20, all the way into Sudbury. It's an extensive and long issue. Points to, so despite my frustration, I haven't heard from a lot of folks with that question. So it would be an opportunity for me to put my partnership hat on and reach out to our friends on the city council and the mayor and try to figure out a way to work with. First of all, I'm not sure where the perfect placing for that would be. I'm certainly not an expert, but there has to be a place in that corridor somewhere where we can put a tower so that the residents are no longer, plagued by this problem. And quite frankly, it could be a public safety issue if someone doesn't have any other way to communicate with folks. So I would be happy to take the lead in working with the city here in Marlborough and with our friends in the wireless communications industries to try to find a solution to that problem.
Thank you. Next question. Resources for seniors. An example would be a caregiver dealing with their parent and dementia. Having a central resource they can go to when issues come up, similar to 9/11. How would you approach that?
Again, this goes back to they are serious. They have been one of the things that when I got elected as selectman, I wanted to do is to expand senior tax relief. And one of the challenges of responding to that need is that all our towns have been struggling well before this pandemic happened. After 2008, government aid to our towns went down from 28% of our revenues down to 19%. We lost $200 million, not adjusting for inflation. This has impacted our town's ability to provide services, much needed services to seniors. And this then affects their health, this affects their caregivers. Ultimately, the best way to get around this is to, again, not just level fund our towns, but again, increase their funding so they can expand not just senior tax relief, but also provide aid to family members that are taking care of seniors. Last but not least, while you are talking about seniors, the other thing that we cannot forget is drug costs continue to rise. And one of the challenges that so many seniors that I've talked to face is that what bill do you want me to pay? Do you want me to pay my property tax bill? Do you want me to pay for my fluid pills? Do you want me to pay for my sugar pills? So the only way out of this is ultimately increased funding for our towns. Thank you.
Thank you. State Representatives, resources for seniors. An example would be caregiver dealing with their parent with dementia, having a central resource they can go to when issues come up.
So actually there is a central resource they can go to. The Alzheimer's Association has a hotline. As you know, last session I was the author of a groundbreaking law to deal with not only patients and folks in Massachusetts dealing with Alzheimer's, but also their caregivers and their physicians and nurses. So that no-cost provision was a first-in-the-nation bill that has since been modeled by many states across this country that would require training of physicians in how to better deal with folks who present with Alzheimer's or related dementia, as well as physicians, assistants, nurses. So there is a resource for folks dealing with that, and I would encourage you, if you don't know the Alzheimer's hotline, or you can't find it, please contact me. I'll be happy to help you. Secondly, to the point about overall care and folks that are struggling, listen, we know that we have challenges in Massachusetts as far as healthcare, but we are working day in and day out to increase the care force for home care workers, for seniors who want to stay in their homes, in addition to increasing funding for long-term care facilities so that they can hire qualified help so that the patients that are in these facilities are being taken care of properly. I mean, I served as the chair of the Joint Committee on Elder Affairs last session, and I could talk about this until I was blue in the face. So I would encourage people to do their homework, but Massachusetts understands the silver tsunami crisis, and we're working on it, and we're on the front lines.
Thank you. Mr. Hashmi, how would you address the rising cost of universities and the rising debt accrued by students pursuing higher education?
You're absolutely right, and this is even more critical in the middle of a pandemic. We have graduates that are graduating with tremendous bills and also the inability to find jobs. It's also tragic that, again, part of this is the lack of public funding for our state universities. So one, we need to increase the funding, but the other thing that is of great concern to me is the rise of non-administrative staff at many of these public universities. I am, and I say this as someone who was on faculty at several state universities, and I was always amazed at the number of administrators that we have and not teachers, and the amount of money that is spent on administrative staff, including senior leadership. So one, I think we need to look at the fact that the job of universities is to teach our students. It's not to pay money to administrators. So one, increase funding, make sure that funding is going to students, help students with their debt, and then cut down on administrative costs.
Thank you. State Representative, how would you address the rising costs of universities and the rising debt accrued by students pursuing higher education?
So this is yet another issue where the legislature has already acted. Last year, we passed a significant and aggressive bill to cut down and to curb the for-profit universities and the predatory practices that they're using on students, not only here in Massachusetts, but across the country. So they would, for instance, take a tuition and fee and then close in the middle of a semester and walk away with that money, and those students would have no access to their transcripts or any of their documents. So we working with the Attorney General here in Massachusetts, we put an end to that predatory practice. Secondly, we have seen an increase in our community colleges and our relationships with our technical high schools, so that, and also with our high school, early high school college, so that we have students that are leaving Massachusetts public high schools with the equivalent of an associate's degree. And so they can then go on to a accredited college and university and only have to pay for 2 years of tuition, which is a huge relief, obviously, to families. But that having been said, I think higher education is a problem, and we are looking to fix it. And I want to just put it out there to folks that I'm still paying my student loans, and I'll be paying them off until the day I die. And I want to do everything in my power to make sure that we don't burden our kids with a lifetime of repayment and something that won't allow them to live a proper life here in Massachusetts.
Thank you. Mr. Hashmi, nonprofits have had to figure out large unemployment increase costs during COVID. Do you have any strategies to help with these costs?
Yes, in these times, so nonprofits, especially community organizations, have really taken the lead in taking care of our residents. It's not just food pantries, it is local community organizations. And the problem, as you're correctly pointing out, is that because of the economic devastation caused by this crisis, they are not getting donations. But their work that they're doing is more essential now more than ever. So yes, to me, the critical thing is we need to, again, it goes back to what I was saying, we need to fund them. And the easiest way to fund them is to fund them by adequately funding our towns, because they know, and I say this as a selectman of a town, we know the groups in town that are doing the work, and we know where to send the money. So instead of just bypassing us, it is far more prudent and more useful to give us the money so that we can then hand it out to the nonprofits and other organizations in town that are doing this incredible work. Because without them, truly, we wouldn't have lasted this long. So kudos to them, and this work, sadly, will need to continue. It won't be stopping anytime soon.
Thank you. Nonprofits have had to figure out large unemployment increases in costs during COVID. Do you have any strategies to help with these costs?
So I think the first thing to address is that nonprofits run the gamut, right? There are local organizations that are running on $10,000, $20,000 a year, but Harvard Vanguard and Blue Cross Blue Shield Massachusetts are also technically nonprofits. So I think we have to draw a distinction. And I also realize that these folks are not able to hold their annual fundraisers. I did a Zoom last night with some of my friends from the Heart Association, and they're not able to hold their walk this year. That event for them typically would raise millions and millions of dollars that then in turn goes into research. So I'm trying to participate in as many of those things as I can and donate as much as I can, and I'm encouraging everyone else to do that. To the Selectman's point, unfortunately, what you're suggesting is against the law. There's an anti-aid clause in our state laws that disallows cities and towns from helping nonprofits, and it's largely to prevent the overexercise of discretion, if you will, or playing favorites. So it's not something that is workable under the current law. While I certainly hope that we can continue to divert state money directly to these groups, it's and we have been, by the way, including the money that I've gotten for our food pantries in all 3 communities. It's what the Selectman was suggesting isn't something that's possible.
Thank you. That's a good time to ask the question. There is so much divisiveness out there, Mr. Hashmi. Now, is there a policy that your opponent has brought forth that you agree with?
Yes, actually. I think her initiatives on Alzheimer's dementia are worth commending. I think that is is something to be commended. She's to be commended for.
Thank you. And State Representative, there's so much divisiveness out there now. Is there a policy your opponent has brought forth that you agree with?
So first of all, thank you. It was a lot of hard work, and I'm happy that we did it, and we will continue that work. Second of all, I'd like to plug my other public health initiative, the e-cigarette flavor ban that we did last year, which has made a huge impact on the youth of Massachusetts. Again, was the first in the nation. And then I would like to say that while we see divisiveness pretty much on a national level, luckily here in Massachusetts, the legislature is overwhelmingly Democratic, but we work with a Republican governor. My first supporters of that e-cigarette flavor ban were Republicans. The ranking member on the Public Health Committee, the Republican Representative Hannah Kane, took the floor to encourage her colleagues to vote for that flavor ban. So while there is a lot of divisiveness in Washington and on a national level, I think Massachusetts holds itself out to be a leader in working together and in partnership. Unfortunately, despite my best efforts, I haven't been able to find a policy proposal from my opponent. He has a lot to say about what we should do or how we could do better or what we're not doing, but there aren't a lot of solutions forthcoming there. So unfortunately, I don't have anything to pin down that I can compliment him on right now.
Thank you. Mr. Hashmi, if money were no object, what is a project you would want to get done, moonshot-like?
One project or as many as I want?
One project.
Funding affordable childcare and pre-K.
Okay. State Representative, if money were no object, what is a project you would want to get done, moonshot-like?
Sure. Well, according to what my opponent has had to say so far tonight, it sounds like money is no object to him. But for me, it's a project that I've been working on for 10 plus years and something that we've gotten initial funding for the planning stage, and it's the reconstruction of the 495-290 interchange. As you may be aware, it's extraordinarily dangerous the way that hairpin turn comes off of 290 East onto 495 North. We have truck rollovers there regularly, and it's begun to impact the daily lives of the commuters in and around the 4th Middlesex District. So like I said, it's something that we've gotten a couple $100 million for the redesign phase. Unfortunately, it is completely surrounded by wetlands, so there are a lot of issues that go along with that, as well as federal highway issues. But my colleagues and I have done a tremendous job advocating for improvements along the 495 corridor, whether it's 495-90, 495-9, and then 495-290. So I'd just really like to see that vision brought to fruition. And it's a moonshot project, but it's something that I'm still fighting for in reality. So.
Thank you very much. All right, we're on to my last question. Mr. Hashmi, what is the last book you read?
My goodness, the last book. It's been a while since I've read a book. But actually, All the King's Men.
All the King's Men. State Representative, what's the last book you read?
I read Pride and Prejudice every year. It's a personal favorite of mine. But on a more sort of pop note, I recently read the sequel to Margaret Atwood's book, The Handmaid's Tale, about the dystopian reality, which unfortunately we seem to be getting closer and closer to every day in this country.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And now we're going to move into the section where the candidates will question each other. Mr. Hashmi, you had won, so the first question is yours.
Okay. If the voters want to know the difference between me and the representative, you can look no further than this card, which was addressed to me and came to my home address, and it's from Representative Gregoire and her family to celebrate her 40th birthday, with suggested contributions of $50, $100, $250, $500, and $1,000. To me, the privilege of elected office is a chance to serve those who elected you. It's not about using that privilege or abusing that privilege to serve yourself. I remember my anger at reading this card that some politician would ask for my hard-earned money to celebrate their birthday. But then I thought, if I don't contribute, what will happen to my town? If I contribute, will I get extra favors for my town? I chose not to contribute, but how many people did not have that choice and had to contribute to keep in favor with the representative? Perhaps the most ancient injunction about public life is that you shall not side with the great against the powerless. How do you square that with this card? Do you regret sending this card?
Absolutely not. As you've become aware during this campaign, spending money to get elected is part of how we get elected and do the good works that we do. And so, yes, we phrased it as a birthday celebration, but we have an annual celebration here in the district every year. We have folks that come. There is in no way an extortion for you will get a return on your investment or you won't. It's just ridiculous that you would even insinuate that. Second of all, I put a lot of that money back into the community. I just donated to the Westborough Food Pantry. I've donated hundreds and hundreds of dollars throughout the course of this pandemic, if not thousands, to community organizations out of that money that I raise. So in addition to buying lawn signs, which I know you dislike, and advertising and sending mail to let the voters know where I stand, it's my job to raise this money to use for our communities, in addition to, again, being able to communicate to folks the good work that we are doing. But I resent the implication that it is anyway an extortion for money. We ask, if you give, and we're grateful, and if you don't, we totally understand. So I don't want anyone to take what the Selectman is saying as, word. And I also want to note that you've spent over $25,000 of your own money, including $15,000 on a website. So perhaps if you had asked for some help from some of your supporters, you might have been able to get away with not spending your own money on those kinds of things.
Actually, so can I respond?
30 seconds.
So the reason I used my money is I didn't want to be beholden to anyone but myself. The representative in her card does not say whether this money is going to go to charity or not. But the last thing is, yes, she's absolutely correct. That is a difference. I didn't want to, like as I've said before, I didn't want to be beholden to anyone but to you. I didn't want to get money from lobbyists, and I haven't, unlike the representative.
All right, State Representative, your next question.
Sure. So my question goes back to something we discussed just a minute ago, and it goes back to all of this money that you say we should be spending, which I would love to spend also on child care and seniors and education and healthcare and higher ed and nonprofits. And you've said we want to spend, and I have not heard from you either now, tonight, or previously where you're going to raise this money, because in Massachusetts, you may not be aware, we're constitutionally mandated to have a balanced budget.
So there were options well before Representative Gregoire, and they were available on my website way back in June for you to look at on ways to raise money. The first part of this would have been to make sure that the accelerated sales tax, that remittance that was passed by the legislature and approved by the governor, was put into place. Now, you as a chairman of the Regulatory Oversight Committee could have made sure that that was done electronically. Second, we could have raised the tax rate applied to corporate income tax levels to pre-2010 levels. This will raise approximately $375 to $500 million per year. We could also recouple the Massachusetts tax code to the federal Global Intangible Low Tax Income GLTI provision. This would again raise another $200 million a year. We could raise the tax rate applied to unearned income. Each 1 percentage point would generate, again, approximately $400 million per year. We could eliminate single sales factors, tax apportionment, and based on historical data, that could, again, raise $180 million. So I think I have now essentially laid out all the mechanisms that we could raise the revenue for the things that I talked about. But what, to me, is the greatest tragedy is the fact that I'm even having to say this. This is stuff these ideas were present well before for you to enact, and the legislature chose not to enact them.
Thank you. 30-second rebuttal.
Sure. I want to be clear that just because you have an idea doesn't mean it's a good idea. And just because you have an idea doesn't mean that the voters of this district or the voters of Massachusetts agree with that idea. As a representative, I have 159 colleagues in the House and 40 in the Senate, and it's our job to reach a consensus, and not only to represent the voters who support us and agree with us, but all of the voters. And so with what you just mentioned, I got, off the top of my head, quick math, about $1.1 billion. And quite frankly, we run on a budget that's about $44 billion right now, and we're looking at a shortfall due to the pandemic between $3 and $8 billion. So while I appreciate the $1.1 billion that you're bringing to the table as a potential solution, which, by the way, I would be happy to look at and have been happy to consider a lot of these things, I'm not an island. I can't do any of them on my own. And I think, quite frankly, I'm not sure that it continues to pay for all the things that you've suggested.
Thank you. Next question.
Recently, actually on this Monday's Boston Globe, in the middle of a devastating pandemic, the Boston Globe pointed out that the Massachusetts legislature has not held a single formal session or a roll call vote in the past 2.5 months. State Representative Russell Holmes eloquently put it, "We should be embarrassed as a legislature to sit here in the middle of a crisis and not deliver for our communities. Are you embarrassed by this inaction?"
First, I want to go back to the first question, and I just want to point out for anyone who's listening or watching that doesn't know me, I am not beholden to anyone except the voters of this district. I want to make that perfectly clear, and if anyone thinks otherwise, as apparently the Selectman does, they're sadly mistaken, and they don't know anything about me or the job that I do as a state representative. To the direct question, no, I'm not ashamed, because while we haven't held a formal session, we're meeting twice an informal session every single week, and as I've stated earlier tonight, throughout the course of this pandemic, this legislature has been reactive, whether it's things I do on my personal time and my work time and on a daily basis, helping hundreds and hundreds of constituents who have had issues with the registry or with the Department of Unemployment or with the Department of Revenue, whether it's helping folks through a supplemental budget, like with the food pantry. I am working every day. I don't need a formal session and an opportunity to push a red or a green button in a chamber in a room in Boston to do my job, and I have done it, and I think I've done it well. Like I said earlier tonight, is there always room for improvement? Absolutely, but anyone who thinks that we're not working because we're in formal session isn't doing their job correctly, and I would suggest that to Representative Holmes.
Okay, 30-second rebuttal.
So Representative Gregoire is absolutely correct. The legislature has been reactive, not proactive. And these are the things that the legislature has failed to do. They failed to extend the moratorium on eviction. They have failed to control the cost of insulin. They have failed to extend sick leave benefits. They have failed to even pass a budget on time. So granted, my ideas of raising at least $1 billion may be in a $45 billion budget, may be small fry to Representative Gregoire, but that is the lifeline for towns like myself, towns like Marlborough, towns like Northborough.
Thank you. State Representative, next question.
Sure. So this is tough for me, and I don't feel comfortable doing it, and I want to put that out there before I even start. Unlike my opponent, I'm not a gotcha kind of person. That's not how I typically roll, but I believe there's some information that folks out there need to be aware of. So, Selectman Hashmi, you purport to be a currently practicing trauma surgeon.
No, that's not, sorry.
Okay. Or a currently practicing physician. In reviewing your materials, I've only been able to find an office address in Pennsylvania. You list no affiliated hospitals or medical centers with your registration on the Board of Registration of Medicine's website. Are you not required to hold privileges in a hospital to be a surgeon? And if so, why don't you list any hospitals in your profile? And if you don't practice in any hospitals, how can you list yourself as a practicing surgeon?
Actually, I don't list myself. Again, I've not looked at, the last time I looked at my registration, I renewed my registration, I think it was
Last year.
last year in 2020.
Nope,
And-
2019.
Okay, sorry, 2019, you may be right. And in that field, they ask if you're a surgeon, and that is my specialty. I'm currently certified in surgery and critical care. I currently work at Bay State. I've never said that I'm a currently practicing trauma surgeon. That is my training, but currently I'm working at Bay State at that facility.
30-second rebuttal.
For me, as someone who has been trained as an attorney but is not a practicing attorney, to me, the equivalent of telling folks that I'm an attorney makes it sound like I'm going to court every day. And I think that there is a really serious disconnect. The Selectman has started every single, whether it's his mail or his social media or his literature that he leaves at houses, as a physician, as a surgeon, as someone who is trained, it to me seems to be misleading. I think that if nothing else, the voters deserve honesty from folks who are running to represent them, and I believe that the way that my opponent has held himself out is not necessarily fraudulent, but at least misleading.
Next question is yours.
I thought there were two questions. That we were asking.
If you're through with your question.
No, I can keep going.
Yes,
Oh,
go ahead, we have time.
Oh, okay. Well then, thank you. That's great. Legislation to address sexual assault campuses on colleges has been languishing for 5 years. This was a Boston Globe editorial calling out the legislature for its inaction on this. My question to my opponent is, why didn't you use your voice, your stature, to urge passage of this legislation? The other, and this is just along with that, in 2018, Representative Diana DiZoglio revealed she had experienced sexual harassment as a staffer and joined a growing movement of women by breaking her non-disclosure agreement in a speech on the House floor. Why didn't you support her? And in fact, you voted to retain non-disclosure agreements. Why?
So first of all, I just want to say I think it's great that you can read the Boston Globe. I just really, the view from the cheap seats must be fantastic. But I'm in the front lines and I'm doing this work every single day. And to the first question about sexual harassment on college campuses, it's not languishing, it's being worked on. These major pieces of legislation sometimes take tweaking and they sometimes take time. It was teed up for earlier this, maybe early January, February, March, and obviously got put aside in the midst of the pandemic. I believe that this legislature has committed to doing something on this bill, maybe not the exact wording the way it is right now, but I think it's something that's very important. And I have used my voice, as a matter of fact, with leadership to voice my support for this bill and to voice it moving forward. Again, nothing happens in a vacuum. And to your point about Representative DiZoglio, I know what happened in that situation, and I know Representative DiZoglio, now Senator DiZoglio, and I didn't support her because I didn't think she was telling the truth. And quite frankly, to move forward for all women on something that's not based in fact hurts all women. And I want to support and uplift all women. And I didn't believe the way in which that was done was the right thing to do, nor did I believe the person that was doing it was the right one to be making the move.
30-second rebuttal.
5 years to pass a legislation to prevent sexual assault is, to me, you talk about malpractice, to me that is the equivalent of malpractice. This is a simple thing that should have been taken care of. It doesn't take 5 years to do this. The fact that it doesn't reflects, I think, on the way the legislature works.
Okay. Next question is yours.
So you've criticized the way that the legislature works and how long it takes us to get things done and how you're going to clearly magically flip a switch should you get elected. I'd like to give me one example of something that you have accomplished as a member of the Board of Selectmen over the last 2.5 years.
One, ensuring, setting up the Senior Taxation Aid Relief
That was already
Committee.
in place.
No, that was not.
Okay.
The way that I don't know if we can respond to each other in any event, but it was already, so that was set up. Second, making sure that the town got involved in municipal vulnerability. That took almost a year of effort on my doing. Third, making sure that there was an expansion of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Fourth, setting up the town's, helping write the town's response on diversity, our commitment to diversity. Fifth, making sure that the town took a proactive step to prevent Eversource building a pipeline through our town. That is an ongoing project. The next project of mine that I'm going to be looking at is fighting for a residents' Bill of Rights.
30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is that despite my best efforts, as I typically do every 2 years when running for re-election, reached out to the Selectman 2 years ago when I was running, and he didn't have the time to meet with me. Per his own words, he was just too busy. He couldn't make the time to sit down for a cup of coffee. And I think that demonstrates a lack of willingness to work collaboratively, not only with other leaders, but perhaps to respond to constituent questions. Some of those things that the Selectman has been working on are fantastic, but most of them are still in a process, which I think he should admit that sometimes these things take a little longer than we'd like, and some of them were already in place before he was elected, and he's trying to take credit for them.
Right. Mr. Hashmi, do you have more
Yes.
questions? Okay.
Actually, I do. And this goes back to something, again, Representative Gregoire had said. Well before COVID-19, diabetic patients were having had few options for obtaining affordable insulin. Our representatives could have effectively capped insulin prices months ago by passing Bill S-2425, as the Senate did, but chose to not take on this legislation. Not only that, and again, since you brought up the thing about drug cost prices, there was, and this is again from the Boston Globe, which you're right, I absolutely do read. Drug prices for mass aid have continually gone up. There was a mechanism to negotiate those drug prices and to bring them down and to make those prices publicly available. The Massachusetts House Legislature chose not to proceed with that. It also, as a state, thus, as a state, we have not controlled drug prices. As a state, we have not capped insulin co-payments at under $100 or less, like 6 other states. How do you square that?
Well, without having what you're looking at in front of me and without having the bill that you're looking at in front of me, given the fact that there are literally 6,000 bills filed in front of the legislature every 2 years to throw a number at me without me having it in front of me, I can't really comment to the bill that you're discussing. However, I can comment to the fact that we have worked on, at least on Mass Health and some of the other options that are provided by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as connectors for folks who afford. I heard from a parent within the last 3 weeks who said that Mass Health covers their insulin and has done the greatest thing they've ever, they just have a packaging issue where they're covered for 3 and they can only buy 2. And so and we're reaching out on trying to figure out a way to figure that out, not legislatively, but regulatorily. Sometimes these things have solves that we can find without going through the legislative process. And we have done cost containment. Is it as fast as it should be? No. We've done another healthcare bill that is being conferenced right now as I sit here, and I believe it will have real-time, real cost savings for the residents of Massachusetts, and it's something that's going to get done before January.
30-second rebuttal.
So mass Medicaid is 40% of the budget. The fact that we have voted against, the representatives voted against fair drug pricing is really affecting the people that I see, the people that I've met on the campaign trail. People, and it's not just the people that are suffering to pay for this when they've lost their jobs. How do you think pharmacists are feeling about asking people for their copays when they know that those people are struggling to make ends meet? The fact that we don't do this is a stain on us.
State Representative, last question before closing statements.
Sure. So earlier this year, again, the House passed a sweeping environmental legislation that the National Conference of State Legislatures called the most aggressive emissions reduction goals in the country. We have time and again acted on the environment, and we need to continue to do so because, quite frankly, it's the crisis of our generation. And I haven't heard anything or seen anything from Selectman Hashmi about what he thinks about all of this, what can be done within the resources that we have, and what should be done that the legislature has not already done.
The reason that you haven't seen, so first, as someone that has advocated for municipal vulnerability, fought to get it, took almost for a year, I used to take the New England Journal of Medicine to my selectmen meetings to get my town to pay attention to this issue. The only reason I haven't spoken up about it is because actually there was somebody that was far more qualified than me who was running against Representative Gregoire, Dr. Jean Cahill. I felt she brought the expertise that I did not have, and I felt that the solutions and the things that she was saying were fed with far more expertise than I could bring. So to me, it is the issue of our times. The fact that we have not addressed it, to me, is like you have a cancer and you keep delaying the treatment. To me, the fact that we should have been doing this years ago, and we still, as a state, need to do better.
30-second rebuttal.
Well, again, we have been doing this for the last at least 10 to 12 years since I've been around, repeatedly in 2008, 2010, 2012, and on and on and on. The House and the Senate have passed these bills and gotten them signed into law. Our legislation, and with all due respect to Jean Cahill, who brought a lot to the table and actually provided potential solutions, and I've been meeting with her as a constituent over the years, and I think she has some great ideas, and some of them were included in this bill, including but not limited to a shortened timeline between procurement and solicitation for offshore wind, an additional 2 projects for offshore wind in the Commonwealth, the net zero emissions issue. So a lot of the things, respectfully, that my primary opponent was talking about with regard to the environment, which also respectfully was the only thing that she spoke about during the campaign, are already in play and are already happening here in Massachusetts. And I'm really, really proud of the work that we're doing. Again, is there always more? Absolutely.
All right, thank you both for your responses to the questions. And with that, Mr. Hashmi will move into your 2-minute closing statement.
The first time I saw a woman with the case of advanced untreated breast cancer, I almost passed out. My nausea didn't come from the horrible disfigurement caused by this woman's tumor. It came from the stench of death that hung around her. I still remember, and I'm haunted by the pain, the fear, and the plea that I saw in her eyes. She was poor and had hungry mouths to feed, and had gone to her local providers. But instead of treating her, because she was poor, they had given her antibiotics. And all the while, the tumor inside of her continued to spread. Like many of our elected officials, none of them had the courage to tell her the truth of her diagnosis. She only sought advanced medical care when the cancer started eating her from the inside out. We keep getting told we can't invest in ourselves. We don't have the money. We don't have the resources. It's not politically expedient. All the time, the problems that we face keep getting bigger and bigger and far more difficult to treat. If we are going to heal ourselves, we're going to need to invest in healing ourselves. The time for Band-Aids has come and gone. The choice in this election is between someone who will offer you a Band-Aid and send you on your way, or someone who will look you in the eye, stand by your side, and help you build a better tomorrow today. This is how we're going to heal Massachusetts together. Communities are built by their residents. If you vote for me, it won't be me that is elected. It is you that is elected. I would promise to think of you and only you. It is only when we choose to realize that the welfare of each of us is fundamentally dependent on the welfare of all of us, will we build that better world for all of us. We can do great things together. Join me in healing Massachusetts together.
Thank you. State Representative?
Sure, thanks, Rob. In this election, voters have a clear choice between proven leadership, effective intergovernmental relationships, and momentum for the future, and a candidate who writes blank checks and doesn't even meet the obligations to which he agrees. We've heard tonight the stark contrast about the work done by me and what my opponent proposes. He repeatedly raises issues but fails to provide one concrete solution. You deserve a state rep whose sole purpose it is to do the work of the residents of Marlborough, Northborough, and Westborough, and who has demonstrated success in doing just that. And this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that boots on the ground work is the job of a state representative. I pride myself on my accessibility and responsiveness to all constituents, not just the hundreds who've called our office for help during the pandemic. We've secured small business loans so that local businesses can retrofit to accommodate social distancing, and we've provided information around ever-changing guidance, available testing sites. We've used our communications, whether it be our email newsletter or social media, to get the word out every week to the voters and the residents of this district. The past several sessions, I've worked towards balanced budgets that make record investments in local aid and education. We've returned record numbers of transportation, infrastructure, and economic development dollars to this district. Just this July, the House passed the most aggressive emissions reductions goals in the country, and our work and investment to stem the effects of climate change continues. Supporting our seniors remains a top priority. In addition to the Alzheimer's law, which I spoke to earlier, we continue our long-term care facility work and helping seniors stay in their homes. We continue our work on public health, social and racial justice, and community development. The choice is between a candidate with no record making empty promises and writing blank checks, and someone delivering for the residents on a daily basis. We face perhaps the most challenging time in living memory, yet we have unlimited opportunity for bold policies and generational change. I ask you to stand with me to keep Massachusetts moving forward, and I humbly and respectfully ask for your vote on or before November 3rd. Thank you.
So in closing, I would like to thank our partners, WMCT-TV, and the Marlborough Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Government Affairs Committee. And thank you most of all to the candidates who have put forth such a great effort into running for a chance to serve as the state representative for the Middlesex 4th District. So please check our website, marlboroughchamber.org, and join us for some other upcoming events. Saturday, October 24th, from 10 to 2 p.m. at Naven's Rink, electronic cycling with the Marlborough Rotary Club in partnership will take place against our sustainability efforts. And more importantly, our Tri-Salute for Our Troops, virtual veterans event on November 12th when they need our support more than ever during this pandemic. So please remember to vote on November 3rd. Thank you for tuning in, and good night.